Easter has always been a fun time for my friends and me, but not for the typical reasons. We'd long outgrown traditional egg hunts. I even dreaded when my parents made me participate with younger cousins. Instead, we created our own tradition, a hybrid game combining Manhunt with an Easter egg hunt. The rules were simple. 2 teams, seekers and hiders. Seekers had to find all the hiders within a time limit while also hiding and protecting eggs. If the hiders captured all the eggs or remained undiscovered when time ran out, they won. We had additional rules about not camping near hidden eggs, but those details aren't important to what happened. Last year, the Thursday before Easter, school was canceled for Friday, giving us the perfect opportunity for an overnight game. There were 5 of us: me, Jake, Race, Chuck, Arthur, and Michael. Everyone called Michael Raz because of his last name, Razzie. We gathered at Raz's house since his place was the largest by far. His backyard bordered a decent-sized wooded area, and with his parents away until Friday evening, we'd have the entire place to ourselves. We spent most of the evening playing video games in his basement until Chuck suggested we play our version of Manhunt. Everyone was enthusiastic, so we gathered whatever flashlights we could find in Raz's garage. Using a random number generator on Jake's phone, we divided into teams. I ended up seeking with Chuck and Raz, while Jake and Arthur would hide. Raz's mother had plenty of plastic Easter eggs stored away, so we grabbed a handful before heading outside. Having played in these woods numerous times, we knew the boundaries well. The fence line marked the far perimeter, with a creek and the slope leading to a neighbor's horse pasture forming the other edges. We set timers on our phones. 10 minutes for the hiders to conceal themselves, and for us seekers to hide our eggs. Once the countdown ended, the hunt began. Dusk had settled, but darkness hadn't completely fallen. When our timers buzzed, we split up to cover more ground. I veered left into a denser cluster of trees, while Raz and Chuck headed in opposite directions. I kept my hand partially covering my flashlight, only briefly illuminating the ground to avoid tripping. Otherwise, I relied on moonlight. Using a flashlight continuously would immediately alert any hiders to my position. Several minutes into the search, I noticed movement about 30 feet ahead. I immediately switched off my light and froze. Someone was crouching behind a tree trying to remain perfectly still. My first thought was that I'd spotted Race. He always hid close to seekers, thinking no one would expect such boldness. Crouching low, I circled slowly, planning to surprise him from behind. When I'd positioned myself perfectly, I lunged forward, tapping the figure firmly on the shoulder. "Gotcha!" I shouted triumphantly. But when he turned, ice flooded my veins. This wasn't any of my friends. A grown man with slicked back hair stared back at me, his eyes unnaturally wide, as if he were on something. His clothes were tattered, filthy, and he reeked of body odor and something far worse. Before I could process what was happening, he tackled me to the ground. I screamed as I hit the dirt, but his hands immediately clamped around my throat, cutting off both my air and any chance to call for help. His full weight pressed down on me, and in that terrifying moment, I was certain I would die there in those dark woods. Just when my vision began to darken, the pressure suddenly lifted. A flashlight beam bounced through the trees nearby. One of my friends was running toward us. The man must have seen it too, because he released me and bolted deeper into the forest, disappearing almost instantly. I lay there gasping, desperately pulling air into my lungs. Seconds later, Chuck reached me and helped me to my feet. He'd witnessed the attack and urged me not to pursue the man, advice that likely saved my life. Instead, we ran back toward the house. Chuck called everyone else, telling them to return immediately. Once we all reconvened in Raz's basement, I described what had happened, with Chuck filling in details from his perspective. Everyone talked over each other until Arthur shared something that silenced us all. Before the game even started, during that initial 10-minute period, I saw 2 people walking through the trees near where I was hiding, Arthur said. They were moving slowly, like they were scouting or waiting for something. I actually got annoyed because I thought it was two seekers teaming up and breaking the rules. Chuck, Raz, and I exchanged glances, shaking our heads simultaneously. None of us had been together, and there was no way we could have reached Arthur's hiding spot that quickly. The realization struck us simultaneously. If it wasn't any of us, then at least 3 strangers had been in those woods. The man who attacked me, plus the 2 figures Arthur had seen. In that moment, I understood how fortunate I'd been to listen to Chuck rather than chase after my attacker. I might have walked straight into an ambush. "We need to call the cops," I insisted. I was literally attacked, but Raz immediately cut me off, suddenly serious. "No, we're not calling anyone." When I demanded to know why, he explained that he was technically grounded and explicitly forbidden from having friends over while his parents were away. Involving police would get him into serious trouble. I argued that this was a situation worth facing consequences for, but Raz refused to budge. The others were caught in the middle, uncomfortable with ignoring what had happened, but reluctant to put Raz in a difficult position with his parents. Eventually, I gave in, agreeing not to call the police and to try enjoying the rest of the night. But I was deeply shaken. I went to bed early and left before anyone else woke the next morning. Surprisingly, the incident didn't affect me as deeply as you might expect. I've always believed in moving forward, rather than dwelling on frightening experiences. About a week later, Raz told us he'd returned to the woods, terrified, but determined to collect the Easter eggs we'd left behind. We all laughed at his bravery, but his comment made me reflect on that night again. I never discovered who those men were, or what they were doing in the woods. All I know is that Chuck's timely arrival likely saved my life, and I won't be spending any more nights at Raz's place. I'm at college now, far from those woods, but with Easter approaching, memories of that night have resurfaced with unsettling clarity. Easter Sunday had always been special in my family. Growing up in a deeply religious household, these holy days felt magical to me. I was about 6 or 7 that particular Easter, still young enough to believe in all kinds of wonders. The church service had run longer than usual that morning. Afterward, my parents took me downstairs to the Sunday school classrooms, or CCD as our church called it. The entire basement level had been transformed for Easter. Pastel streamers hung from the ceiling, paper cutouts of lambs and crosses adorned the walls, and drawings of Jesus with children were taped between doorways. Some teachers even wore those cheap bunny ears you'd find at drugstores. The festive atmosphere downstairs outshone even the formal service upstairs. Our church had an interesting layout. The main sanctuary with the altar and pews was upstairs, while all the classrooms occupied what was technically a basement, though the church sat on a slope so you could enter from ground level. A long carpeted hallway ran the length of the basement with 7 or 8 classrooms branching off on either side. At the very end stood 2 bathrooms, one for boys, one for girls, and beside them, a heavy gray emergency exit door that was almost always locked from inside. Never use that door, the adults always warned us. It locks automatically behind you, and you'll be stuck outside. During class, I found myself unable to wait until the end of the lesson. I raised my hand, asked to use the bathroom, and was excused. The bathrooms were about 15 feet down the hall, not far enough to warrant an escort. I slipped out quietly, while my classmates continued coloring pictures of Jesus rising from the tomb. Inside the bathroom, I shut the stall door behind me. The silence was broken only by the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the distant echo of a teacher's voice from down the hall. But then I heard something else, a strange, metallic scraping sound coming from the stall beside mine. It wasn't normal movement or someone unlocking a door. It was slow and uneven, like something being dragged against metal. I didn't feel scared yet, just confused. I finished my business quickly, thinking perhaps another child was in there. As I washed my hands and looked into the mirror, I saw the neighboring stall door, opening slowly, in the reflection. But instead of another child stepping out, it was a grown man wearing an Easter Bunny costume. The costume wasn't like the pristine ones you'd see at a mall. This suit was dingy. A grayish white, rather than pure white, with stains in various places as if it had never been cleaned. One of the eyes on the head looked crooked, sewn back on hastily. The ears flopped forward slightly, limp and worn. Strangely, I wasn't frightened. In my innocent mind, this was simply the Easter Bunny making a surprise visit to our church. I turned around with a smile. "Hi," I said cheerfully. The Easter Bunny didn't respond. He stood halfway out of the stall, his head tilted at an odd angle, completely motionless. After an uncomfortable silence, he finally stepped fully out and slowly raised one arm, pointing toward the exit door. His voice came muffled through the mess. "You're the lucky chosen child. I have a gift for you outside." Without hesitation, I followed him. The idea that I'd been specially selected for an Easter surprise thrilled me. Being in church gave me a false sense of security. This was a safe place. After all, I pushed open the heavy gray door, forgetting that it would lock behind us. The Easter Bunny followed close behind. He led me across the pavement toward the far corner of the church parking lot. There was a car parked there, partially hidden by the dumpster and some scraggly bushes. At some point, he took my hand. I remember thinking it was strange that he'd parked so far away and didn't have a basket of candy or gifts. We were halfway across the lot when I saw it. A second Easter Bunny stepping out from the car. I stopped walking immediately. My young mind couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. I looked back and forth between the two of them, completely confused. I hadn't noticed that car earlier, and now there were two Easter Bunnies. Something felt terribly wrong. What happened next, I've always considered divine intervention. One of the teachers, Miss Sabrina, happened to be walking around the church, perhaps getting ready for the egg hunt. She glanced toward the parking lot and saw me being led away. The scream that erupted from her throat was unlike anything I'd ever heard. Raw and primal with terror. Instantly, the Easter Bunny released my hand and sprinted toward the car. I ran in the opposite direction, straight to Miss Sabrina's outstretched arms. As the car sped away, I caught a glimpse of something that haunts me to this day. What appeared to be another child in the back seat. Miss Sabrina wasn't looking, but I told her what I thought I'd seen. The hours that followed were chaotic. Police took my statement, asking detailed questions about what I'd seen, particularly about the child I believed was in the car. My mother cried for what seemed like hours after we returned home. Police investigated but found nothing conclusive. No children were reported missing in the area. The working theory was that someone familiar with the church had obtained a key to that back door and waited in the bathroom for an opportunity, which came when I walked in alone. Years have passed, but Easter never comes without me recalling this experience. What troubles me most isn't that I was nearly abducted, but the possibility that another child wasn't as fortunate as I was. I still believe there was a child in that back seat, and I wonder what became of them. Every Easter, my entire extended family makes the journey to Uncle Robert's house deep in the countryside. His enormous home sits on a vast stretch of open land, completely surrounded by dense woods. Though I've visited countless times over the years, I've never ventured into those forests that loom behind his property. Nature has never held much appeal for me. I dreaded this particular trip more than usual. I've always felt like an outsider in that branch of my family. They're all passionate outdoorsmen, hunters, and fishers who've spent their entire lives in rural settings. Meanwhile, I'm the city kid who can't tell one bird call from another. Most of my cousins are significantly older than me, already married with children or managing farms of their own. The only relative close to my age is Eric, just a couple years my senior. He's surprisingly laid back compared to the others and always makes an effort to keep me company during these gatherings. He understands I don't quite fit in and never makes me feel awkward about it. We arrived at Uncle Robert's house late Friday evening after a long drive. Exhausted from the journey, I went straight to bed. The next morning, Eric and I retreated to the basement, where an old pool table offered escape from the holiday chaos already consuming the house. Neither of us played particularly well, but it beat sitting upstairs amid the growing crowd of relatives. With no television downstairs, Eric played music from his phone while we talked about trivial family drama. Between shots, he kept mentioning the woods behind Uncle Robert's house. They stretch for miles, he said, chalking his cue. Most people never go far enough to see the really interesting parts. There's something magical about being that isolated, surrounded by nothing but trees and silence. I nodded politely, though forest talk wasn't exactly my idea of fascinating conversation. Eric clearly loved it though, his eyes lighting up as he described hidden streams and unusual rock formations. Later that day, despite my reluctance, Eric somehow convinced me to join him for a walk through those woods. Boredom can drive you to strange decisions, and the mind-numbing tedium of forced family interaction had reached its limit. We informed Uncle Robert of our plans. He's always been the cool uncle who gives younger family members freedom, a philosophy I wished my own parents shared. Eric led the way across the sprawling backyard toward the tree line, moving with the confidence of someone who'd taken this path countless times before. The forest was dense, but not impenetrable. Eric followed what appeared to be a natural pathway, though it was barely visible to my untrained eye. The afternoon was still bright, so I wasn't concerned about losing daylight. But I did wonder how we'd find our way back through the increasingly thick vegetation. After about 20 minutes of walking, I asked Eric if he was certain of our location. He laughed. "I know these woods like the back of my hand," he assured me. "Been exploring them since I was a kid. Don't worry." We continued for another 20 minutes when we both froze simultaneously. From somewhere ahead came a distinct sound, a heavy, rhythmic thunk. Not the random noise of wildlife or twigs breaking underfoot, but a deliberate, measured impact, like something striking wood repeatedly. Pause. Thunk. Pause. Thunk. It reminded me of a hammer or mallet hitting a tree trunk. Eric and I exchanged glances. I could tell he was trying to rationalize the sound. "Could be a hunter, I suppose," he said, but his expression betrayed uncertainty. The sound wasn't close, but it carried clearly through the still forest air. Eventually, the noise stopped. I suggested turning back, but Eric shook his head. Curiosity had gripped us both by then, so we continued walking toward where we thought the sound had originated, moving with heightened awareness of our surroundings. We'd only walked a few more minutes when Eric suddenly stopped, throwing his arm out to halt me. At first, I thought he'd spotted someone ahead, but then he pointed upward. I followed his gesture and struggled to comprehend what I was seeing. 3 inverted crosses were nailed to adjacent trees, positioned at least 15 to 20 feet above ground, far higher than anyone could reach without serious equipment. Before we could even process this disturbing sight, I caught movement in my peripheral vision. I turned to find a man standing motionless nearby. He was dressed like a stereotypical lumberjack. Flannel shirt, work boots, thick beard, but his eyes held a darkness that sent chills through me. Eric stepped partially in front of me, an instinctive gesture of protection. The stranger stared directly at me and spoke in a low, gravelly voice. "You shouldn't be here." Eric immediately apologized, saying we were just leaving, which is exactly what we did. The man remained perfectly still as we retreated, his cold eyes following our departure. We walked back in complete silence, both of us repeatedly glancing over our shoulders to ensure we weren't being followed. When we finally reached the safety of the house, we immediately told Uncle Robert about our encounter. My stomach twisted when he confirmed that no one matching our description lived in the vicinity. He questioned us repeatedly about whether we'd been followed, but as far as we could tell, we hadn't. There wasn't much anyone could do. Someone suggested forming a search party to investigate, but Uncle Robert preferred avoiding confrontation, especially if it might lead strangers back to his property. Eric and I returned to the basement, trying to distract ourselves while the rest of the family resumed their Easter preparations. The encounter disturbed me more deeply than I let on. I went to bed early that night, hoping sleep would clear my mind. Instead, I woke at an unusually early hour, just after 5 a.m., with the first hints of dawn barely breaking the horizon. Unable to fall back asleep, I decided to explore Uncle Robert's extensive library in his third-floor study. As I passed the large window overlooking the backyard, something caught my eye. A faint, flickering glow emanating from the forest edge. It resembled the pulsing light of a small fire, too consistent to be a flashlight. I stood transfixed for nearly a minute, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Curiosity overwhelmed caution, and I descended the stairs and stepped onto the back deck for a clearer view. What I saw there nearly forced a scream from my throat. At least 3 figures stood just beyond the tree line, each holding a small torch. They weren't moving or speaking, just standing there, facing the house, facing me. I ran directly to Uncle Robert's bedroom and shook him awake, frantically explaining what I'd seen. Without hesitation, he grabbed his rifle, pulled on pants, and instructed me to remain inside. He marched onto the back deck and scanned the property while I watched nervously from the doorway. By then, the figures had retreated into the woods. Uncle Robert raised his rifle and fired 3 shots into the air. The loud reports shattered the morning quiet, awakening the entire household and sending the next 20 minutes into complete chaos. That Easter Sunday was ruined, tension hanging over every interaction. No one could focus on the holiday with the knowledge that strangers were lurking in the surrounding forest. When the time came for my parents and me to leave, I couldn't have been more relieved. 9 months have passed since then. Uncle Robert has reported no further disturbances, but I can't imagine living in that house, knowing what might be hiding among those trees. If anything else happens, I'll be sure to share an update, though I pray there won't be one.